You're listening to Let's Talk Pricing, your connection to the voices, stories, and strategies shaping the pricing world. Each episode, we go beyond theory into the practical, timely conversations that help you lead with confidence and drive results. Let's start the show.
Very good day, everyone. It's Kevin Mitchell from Professional Pricing Society here, and I want to thank everyone for joining the Let's Talk Pricing podcast. This is where we talk about specific issues around pricing management, around strategy, around business development, around sales enablement, around revenue management, and much, much more for you and your team. I am very excited today because I get to spend some great time with our guest, Claire Wang. Claire is going to be discussing from pricing analyst to strategic advisor, why technical excellence isn't enough. And I had the great opportunity to attend Claire's workshop with PPS in Barcelona a couple months ago. It was a wonderful day, so I'm really looking forward to our discussion. So Claire, thank you so much for joining the Let's Talk Pricing podcast. How are you today, ma'am?
Very good. Thank you, Kevin. And super excited to be here and to talk about all the topics about communication, pricing, value, influence, and everything in between.
All right, wonderful. And I know that you are very, very well prepared and an expert in all of the above and much, much more. So we are going to have a wonderful discussion. And today we're going to be discussing a specific transition that I've heard many pricing professionals from around the globe having some issues with facing, and that is how they move from being technically excellent at their jobs to becoming a true partner, strategic advisor, and business resource. So, Claire, we know that pricing people tend to be analytically strong, or else they would not be pricing people. They can build models, they can validate assumptions, they can do a lot of the quantitative work necessary, but sometimes there is a disconnect between that part of their duties and between actually accomplishing the mathematical things that they need, the analysis that they need, and then communicating those or providing good, sound recommendations to their partners. And of course, we know that without that connection there, things can evaporate. So I know from you being a partner with PPS and from your great workshop with us that you are a global expert in a lot of these ways. And I know that you work with pricing leaders on how to raise their acumen in these areas and more. I am very much looking forward to your upcoming book, The Price of Influence. And so really, I would like to get started with a couple questions around these areas. So Claire, you've worked at the intersection of pricing and how we influence others for a long time. So what led you to this Venn diagram overlap in these areas, and what led you to develop the concept behind the price of influence?
Yeah, thank you, Kevin, for the question. And I guess that realization was definitely, it took me a while to get there. And I'll answer your question in a sort of long way, right? So I've been working in pricing for a good 20 years. But 2 years ago, I left corporate to, start my own journey of being independent. And initially I thought, I'm just going to do some pricing consultant work. But once you step outside of this sort of like pricing circle, the first thing that struck me was how little people outside of pricing actually understand pricing. And I'm sure you resonate with that. I've had so many instances, people would just come to me and they would go, "Oh, wow, I didn't know such a discipline exists." Or they would say, "Well, Claire, you are definitely the first person I know who works in pricing." And I guess, a very common misconception people have is, they think pricing is simply placing a price tag on a product. But as this is far from what we've been doing. So it took me a long time to sort of like really reflect like why there is such a disconnect. Because we know that pricing is probably, well, not probably, but pricing is the most effective lever to drive the bottom line, more effective than other things like driving sales volume or cutting cost. But that statistics, which we all comfortably be quoting, is really not understood outside of the pricing community. And as I sort of like been reflecting on this, I think one of the issue is really that, many times pricing recommendations or pricing insights don't travel as well within the organization. And what I mean by that is that, pricing people, we are trained, we're all very logical, and sometimes too logical in the way that we think logic is the center of everything. If a recommendation or an idea is logically sound, the data is robust, we believe that it should just sell itself. And unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. Like alignment or buying is not really a byproduct of just being right. It actually requires a lot more work. And that's when I realized, the first sale, we think like pricing is about setting a price for customers, but actually the first sale is that internal sale, that internal alignment of first pushing our idea to our internal stakeholders. So because of that, I started to think, like we've been doing exactly the same thing for our customers, but we haven't been as conscious about bringing that concept to convincing our internal stakeholders. So just like that, I started spending a lot of time looking into this and, sort of exploring how we can bring those pricing principles that we have been using in our day-to-day work, trying to convince customers about the value we provide and apply exactly the same framework on our internal stakeholders to get buy-in.
Understood and very nicely stated. Thank you so much, Claire. What I appreciate about your work is how you talk about making that connection, how you discuss pricing insights don't necessarily travel. We have to sell internally first. If our colleagues, if our salespeople out on the street don't understand everything around the value offering, around the price, why this is a good deal, then it's never even going to make it to the customer in any real fashion that we can think of. And also, I like how you discuss that part of this process, about getting ideas to travel within the organization really involves talking to people on a language that's familiar to them. We can talk logic at a certain level, but if we're talking with someone who needs more of a storytelling basis or more of an emotional approach, or someone who is a 25-year sales veteran, then maybe logic would be a secondary or tertiary thing behind addressing his or her needs directly there. So another question for you is, we as pricing professionals, we can be logical, we can be good at the analysis, and as you stated, these insights don't necessarily travel. What are some ways that we can improve the ability for pricing professionals to get across in our organization? How is a good way that we can get our insights to make those connections that we need?
Okay. Thank you for the question. I guess maybe it's worthwhile to sort of like unpack a little bit on what we meant by insights that travel, right? So ultimately, when we say something travels, it means the idea gets implemented. There's an action associated with it. So the reality is people will only act on your idea if they see a clear benefit taking action on it. And that benefits could be, it helps them to advancing their priorities, or it helps them to reduce the risk, or it helps them to achieve certain objective they have in mind. And that sort of links a little bit to, how we define success, right? Because when pricing people put together a proposal, naturally we think in terms of margin, we think in terms of revenue, maybe elasticity, but that definition of success can be very different to the definition of success of our stakeholders. They might be wrestling with like a lot of other things, which we might not necessarily be aware of. So the first step to make sure that our ideas travel is probably just to have a really good understanding on what our stakeholders care about? What are their risks? What are their constraints? And only we have like a clear, full picture of all that, we can start delivering some insights that really help them to achieve their outcomes, to to get them to be successful.
Of course. Yeah, it takes a little bit of outside in thinking sometimes to think about things
Yes,
from a
exactly.
counterpart's perspective in order to make that connection that we need there. And Claire, since you mentioned influence, since we often in pricing talk about influencing without direct authority, sometimes, what, in your opinion, is the biggest misconception that we as pricing professionals have about influence?
Mm, I think the biggest misconception is probably we don't think it is something that we need to actively manage. As I briefly mentioned, for many pricing people, naturally we feel like if the logic is there, the ideas will travel. We don't have to do more. And if someone doesn't buy in, it's their problem, like they just don't get it. And that's kind of like a common reaction people might have. So I think unless we can kind of first shift that mindset, we'll probably feel frustrated when ideas don't move, because it's just like a different way to approach this sort of problem.
Of course, yeah, that makes for an interesting discussion and an interesting issue to overcome there. And Claire, I know from your work as well, in this parallel between influence and pricing, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier as well, sometimes we think that we have to go in really heavy with the logic, explain everything A to Z all the way through. But also, I know from your workshop and from your other work that sometimes you say, we don't want to use too much force. We don't want to be overly logical. We don't want to delineate everything A, B, C all the way through the end of the alphabet. So, can you help me unpack your idea that sometimes it's better to use less force than more force when we talk about influencing a decision?
Yes, sure. I think this is the part where, I draw the parallel between selling an idea versus selling a product, right? So in pricing, we know our job is to put a value or set a price tag on a product. But to do that, first we need to understand what benefits this product is providing to the customers. And then only the perceived value outweighs the perceived cost. Customers will buy your product. And I like to use that as an analogy to kind of, show that the way we sell an idea is exactly like follows the same dynamic. You can almost treat your idea as a product. And for people to buy in, they need to see the perceived value of saying yes to you outweighs the cost. And the cost here is not measured by money, right? So it is more sort of psychological. It can be cognitive effort. Do I understand what your idea is all about? It can be emotional. That's backing up your idea means that I need to openly admit that I was wrong before. Or it could be credibility. If I say yes to your idea and it doesn't work, like would this look bad on me? So people, when they make decision, there are all this sort of like things that going in the background. They are doing calculation, and only when the perceived value outweighs all this cost or all this cost combined, they will say yes. So that's kind of, when I say we shouldn't force, I think the way is to make sure that people see the value of saying yes. So that value becomes really tangible and it's so clear that it outweighs the cost. And that's when they will say, yes, I'm in, I am endorsing your idea.
Very interesting. So sometimes by using less force, we can get our counterpart to apply a little bit of their own force, their own thinking, in order
Yes.
to basically become a team member in order to get the idea across. And everyone remember that you heard it from Claire Wang. Your idea is a product, And the cost may not be in dollars or euros or a currency. The cost may be psychological. It may be credibility if things do not happen as we expect them to. But if the idea is your product, the cost might be something that is not specifically in non-monetary terms as we sell both internally and externally. And with that, Claire, we're going to take a short break, but everyone, please hold on for a lot more of the Let's Talk Pricing podcast with Claire Wang. And with Claire, we're going to talk more about from pricing analyst to strategic advisor right after this break. So stay with us. Thank you so much.
Hey, this is Tracy Dent from Holden Advisors. I'm the host of a podcast called If Prices Could Talk. On our show, we sit down with CEOs and pricing leaders to dive into what's working, what's changing, and how to build and sustain pricing power in today's markets. We get into tactical approaches to value-based pricing and ways to equip sales to defend those prices and negotiate with backbone. I hope you join us. Find us by searching If Prices Could Talk on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Let's Talk Pricing podcast. We are with Claire Wang today, and we're talking about the big transition from being a pricing analyst to becoming a strategic advisor for your business. And we have also talked a little bit about influencing without authority, which we as pricing professionals know is one of the core critical things that we deal with sometimes. And so, Claire, a question for you. Since in a lot of organizations, the pricing professionals, the pricing department may not own the final decision, it might be in product management or sales or finance or elsewhere. How can we as pricing professionals influence outcomes without that direct formal authority that we lack sometimes?
Okay. So I think the first part is probably this mindset shift, right? Because for a lot of people, they think their job is about providing accurate analysis. So unless we can shift away from that mindset, it's very hard to actually start acting as a business partner. So I would say, the first step is really to position yourself as, my job is actually to shape the outcome of a decision. And once you have that, then everything you do will be kind of like steering towards that direction. Let me give you let's try to have a concrete sort of pricing workflow example, right? Mm-hmm. Say on a regular day, our work might look like our stakeholders came to us with a request. And very often, rather than like doing a deep dive and questioning about, what's the real problem at hand, we might be jumping into just working on a solution. So that has some risk. Firstly, you might end up solving a problem that doesn't exist because you didn't spend that time to properly assess like what's the real problem. So, that sort of problem alignment is the first step to make sure we'll be seen as a business partner. Because if we can help to shape the right question to ask, then over time, we get invited to the conversation early, and people start seeing you as someone who can help to shape the question rather than just being reactive and answering that question. And then I guess after that, the whole process about, having a solution, but then having a solution, we also need to package that in a way that resonates with our audience. So it can be the same piece of insights, but depending on who you talk to, you might choose to highlight different components. So when you talk to finance, maybe you'll address more on the risk. When you talk to product, maybe you need to address more on the customer experience or whether things will fall into their product release cycle. When you talk to sales, maybe it's about the volume, whether this new target will help them to achieve their bonus for this year, for example. So I think you just need to sort of like wear multiple hats at the same time and really design your communication in a way that can resonate with those people. And when they feel like you understand their word, then they are more likely to see you as a true business partner.
Understood. And thank you, Claire. And this is a particular challenge that a lot of people that I talk with find to be a very, very important one. When you try to gain alignment, you mentioned some of the different groups that we have to address. You mentioned finance. We might talk about the risk, the margin percentage. With the product marketing group, the product management group, we talk about the customer and their experience. And with sales, of course, we might talk about how many units, how much volume, what we can do, how we can build the relationships with the customers going forward. And I know to some of the people listening in today, this sounds very difficult, but I want to give everyone the go ahead and the knowledge that we as pricing professionals, since we do have to be artists and scientists and do have to be at the middle of everything, that yes, we can do this. We all have areas that we need to work on, but you can address all of these different groups and gain alignment. It just takes a little bit of a different language and a little bit of cultural understanding from their perspective in order to do that as well. So these are difficult things, and I don't want any of us to be overwhelmed because it is within us. It is part of our discipline. It's what we do, and it's why a lot of us love what we do with pricing kind of in the center of our organizations like that. So very nicely stated. So thank you so much, ma'am. And I was wondering if you could give us a practical example of what some of these influential things might look like in a pricing setting. So if we talk about being rooted in relevance, in translation, and clarity, how does that look like from, let's say, a new pricing analyst perspective as they're joining an organization?
Sure. I think on a very practical sense, it probably just involves with asking a lot of questions. And especially for people who are relatively new to pricing, sometimes they don't have the confidence to challenge the stakeholders. So the first thing I would suggest is probably just to don't see that as being challenging your stakeholder, but see that as a way to really help them to understand the problems at hand. So ask questions, like what prompted you to reach out to us today? Like what have you observed? Really get them to articulate their problem. And, I'll give you a concrete example here. When I was working for the bank, I had this experience where one of the stakeholders, product manager, came to me and basically he said, well, Claire, we have some issue with our pricing. The market in Singapore thinks that we are too expensive. We need to drop price. We've got a lot of fintech players and all that. So immediately I thought, hey, that sounds a little bit weird because, I look at the pricing, I don't think we are that expensive. And, in some segment, we are actually on par with, some of the fintech players. So when I dig deeper into, where did he get this perception that he thinks we are expensive, that we think he thinks that we need to drop price. So just sort of by throwing a lot of questions, we came to the conclusion that actually we were not the most expensive in market, but our customers think we are the most expensive. So you see, it's kind of shifting from almost like a pricing communication problem than an actual pricing problem. So this is the fun part about pricing, right? You can be like cheap, but if your customers don't realize, if they haven't really done that analysis and put you, side by side with competitors, they will not come to that conclusion. So this ends up being like a marketing, a comms problem rather than a pricing per se problem. So without that conversation and going really deep, if we just went ahead with, their request, we will never get there. And we might, end up just cutting price, losing margin without really, addressing the real issue, which is, how can we make sure that customers see us as a cheap one? What sort of communication method we should adopt to get that message across to our customers?
All right. Very good advice from Claire Wang. Make sure to ask a lot of questions and also make sure that that you realize the perception in your marketplace may be not built on 100% fact there in cases like the one that you just mentioned there. And of course, we as pricing professionals know that value and cost and price, we have to consider everything from our customer's perspective. And Claire, as you mentioned, that first customer is probably someone with an email address that's probably similar to ours. It's within the same company before we even think about getting outside of our company and addressing those issues there. So we definitely have to look at the perception, we have to look at the communication, we have to ask questions, we have to seek to understand from different perspectives what really is the issue here and what's really going on there. So thank you very much. And thanks everyone for joining us for the Let's Talk Pricing podcast. We're going to take a very short break, but we will be right back with more from Claire Wang. We're talking about moving from being a pricing analyst to a strategic advisor, and the Let's Talk Pricing podcast will be right back.
This episode of Let's Talk Pricing is brought to you by the Professional Pricing Society. For over 40 years, PPS has been the home for pricing professionals looking to sharpen their skills, stay ahead of market shifts, and connect with peers who truly understand the discipline. From live and on-demand education to conferences, research, and career resources, PPS supports you at every stage of your pricing journey. Learn more and join the global pricing community at pricingsociety.com. And now, back to the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Let's Talk Pricing podcast. Kevin Mitchell from PPS here, and of course, today we are continuing our discussion with Claire Wang. We're talking about moving from being a pricing analyst to being a true strategic advisor within your organization. We're talking about making that quantum leap there. And when we talk about quantum leaps, we talk about complexity in our organizations. And also there's complexity in a lot of ways with our marketplaces as well. So we as pricing professionals, we know that complexity is one of our main jobs. So Claire, a question for you about that. Business is a lot more complex than it used to be, both internally within our organizations and externally with our marketplace. How does complexity in today's business world change the way that we as influencers inside and outside need to work?
I think the complexity really just means that, when we just make assumption, the risk of doing so is a lot bigger comparing to, let's say, 10 years ago. So as business evolves, as business gets big, naturally you would assume you have to deal with more stakeholders, you have to deal with more competing priorities, you might have to deal with a team, with team members from over the world. So there's cultural aspect to it as well. So any assumption let me give you a funny story, because this just happened this week and I generally find it's really interesting. As you know, I have this book coming out, and actually I just sent the draft to my editor. She's American. And after reading the introduction, she dropped me a quick email and she said, well, Claire, it's very interesting to see the way you open the book with that story. And, I spent most of my adult life in Australia. And then after that, I moved to the UK. When someone said it's really interesting, like in Australia or in the UK, it never means it's interesting. Yeah, we always would just read it with a bit of suspicion, or,
Yes.
What do you really mean there? I feel like you don't like it. Or, in the UK, it's worse. It normally means, I don't like this idea, but I'm just too polite to tell you that directly. So I had to send her an email, because I think Americans are more sort of low context. So, you mean what you say. But, to be on the safe side, I drop her an email and I say, hey, just make sure I understand this. Can I just read things literally? And which, of course, you confirmed. And that just highlights that, for people who, if you don't have that sort of awareness, and if you just, go ahead with your assumption, and this kind of micro moments happen all the time within an organization. And you can imagine if everyone is sort of making their own assumption, interpreting an idea in their own way, by the time the message gets to the, the recipient, there will be so many layers of different assumptions. It might end up to be very different to what the initial idea was all about. And I guess when we talk about very complex organization, we just need to be more aware that, alignment it doesn't just happen naturally. You have to be quite intentional about this by asking again, clarifying questions just to make sure that everyone is on the same page.
Definitely, yes. A great example of how complexity has to take context into account. And of course, someone in one part of the world saying that's an interesting idea might mean something completely different than another individual in another part of the world saying the exact same thing. So, a great way to describe that as well. And Claire, another question for you is that a lot of times we as people assume that the ability to influence is something that's innate with us. Some people are naturally good at making that influencing discussion, and others perhaps not so much. In your opinion, is this something innate, or is it something that can be teachable, it can be learned how to do better?
Definitely something you can learn. So 100% within your control. Having said that, I do think there are certain personality traits that might give you a head start. And for example, empathy. I think, like it just helps so much in kind of having these different perspectives on how other people think, right? So I think empathy, you can argue that some people probably were born with a little bit more of that, but we can argue whether it's a nature nurture thing. But if you have that, then it does help. But that's just one component, right? Like it's all about the sort of accumulation of like small micro behaviors that over time, you start building trust with people. People start seeing you as the trusted advisor. So the friction of taking your advice on board becomes less and less. It's almost like having a bank account. And every time you deliver a job well done, every time you provide a good recommendation, it adds credit into your bank account. And then over time, when you have a lot of balance, people stops like questioning you on all your logic or whatever. They will just see you as a trusted advisor. It's like having a fast pass at Disneyland. You can really accelerate that process. I guess that's the point I'm trying to get at.
Understood. Thank you so much, Claire. And we are running up against time here, but I have one more very important question for you. Since we're talking about pricing professionals and how we can advance in our careers, what do you believe are some of the main factors that separate people who advance into leadership roles versus those who remain purely in an analytical type of a role? What makes leaders for us as pricing people?
Mm. We kind of touched a little bit on this previously. I think that main difference is how you see your job. If you see pricing job as, providing accurate analysis, sending reports, preparing QPR update or things like that, then that's what you would do. You're just, sort of doing this, being reactive, being an analyst, doing this sort of, type of work. But if you see your job as someone who is, shaping the direction of the business, driving an outcome, then naturally, I think, you have a stake in the business. Because I think the reason maybe it might feel more comfortable for people to stay in this sort of analyst position is it's quite objective. You can always hide behind your numbers. You can always say, this is what the model says. This is what the historical experiences is like. But you're not actively taking a stake in your recommendation. Whereas if you want to sort of step up and be a leader, then you need to be emotionally invested in your recommendation. And only by doing so, you get to really drive something that you believe in. So I think that again, I talk a lot about mindset because I don't want this to sound like fluffy, but I do think that how you think the job is really important in shaping how you want to really, shape the work you deliver.
Okay, terrific. Excellent. Thank you so much, Claire. I appreciate that. And I'm going to end our very nice discussion today with a question that I believe was first raised by Ed Kless at one of our events, at one of our panels. And we, of course, know that pricing is both an art and a science. But if you had to pick one or the other, and based on our discussion, I think I know what your answer is going to be. Would you say is pricing an art or is pricing a science?
I think it's a combination of both, right? But because I'm sort of generalizing, but I think most pricing people are very good at the science part. So I think it's really the art part that we probably need to invest a little bit more time to master. At the end of the day, I see pricing as a people's job. And I think that's actually a very good position to be in, given, the world of AI taking over a lot of the basic, analytics work. But our job is protected in the sense that we deal with people, we deal with complexity, we deal with alignment, building trust, all those kind of things that, a machine cannot replace. So it's a combination of both. And if you want to sort of succeed in the future world, then, personally, I would invest more on the art side.
Very nicely stated. So thank you so much, Claire. Appreciate that. And
thank you, Kevin.
You are very welcome, ma'am. Always good to talk with you, of course. Great to see you again. And I want to thank our guest today, Claire Wang, for joining us for the Let's Talk Pricing podcast. Claire, I believe that this has been a very, very important conversation, and I appreciate your insights here for our members. And for PPS members worldwide, I look forward to seeing you again soon. Our spring PPS Profitable 26 conferences will be in Chicago towards the end of April, in Atlanta at the end of October, and in Amsterdam at the very beginning of December. Of course, you can always ask me for questions. You can check us out on pricingsociety.com. And until next time, I want to thank you for joining the Let's Talk Pricing podcast. And Claire, very, very best wishes for your upcoming publication. I am really looking forward to learning a lot more about the price of influence. And hopefully your editors will have some great, clear insights for you so we can understand how things are moving along. But tell us a little bit more about your book, some of the things that we can look forward to seeing in The Price of Influence, and tell us how our members can best get in touch with you, please, ma'am.
Well, thank you for the question. I guess as for my editor, I just hope that she will continue to find the book interesting.
Nicely stated.
Yeah. So the book is about, how can we use the pricing principle and apply that in a way to help us to get more influence at workplace, in life, because it all follows the same principle. And it's scheduled to come out first week of July, so still got a few months to go. I will start doing like cover design and all that sort of very exciting things. So I'm very looking forward to it. The best way to, I guess, stay updated is probably, connect with me on LinkedIn. I publish all the updates through LinkedIn on this platform. And obviously, I'm sure Kevin, I'll let you know when the book is here, and we can see how the best we can get the books into our members' hands.
Definitely. That is something we will do. I look forward to seeing your book this summer as you finish up the important work there. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us for the Let's Talk Pricing podcast. Thank you very much to our special guest today, Claire Wang. And we will see you very soon on another edition coming up of Let's Talk Pricing. Until then, Kevin Mitchell from PPS. Please reach out to me with anything that my team and I can do for you and your team. And we'll look forward to some great information from Claire Wang coming up very soon. Thank you so much, Claire. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everyone.